welcome to Forging Resilience, exploring for a different perspective on strength and leadership. Join me as we discuss experiences and stories with guests to help gain fresh insights around challenge, success, and leadership. Today on Forging Resilience, I have the privilege of being sat with Chris Tamdjidi, who's co-founder of Awaris, which is a company that helps develop human-centered mindfulness programs to help staff and businesses reach their full potential, and as well as the co-author of a credible book, The Resilience Culture. Chris, welcome to our show, mate.
Really nice to see you, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very well, as we've just talked off camera. I'm really good. I'm feeling very blessed. As we just talked, I'm experiencing both ends of the spectrum in terms of the pendulum swinging between love and joy, frustration and fear, and I'm constantly reminded that's exactly where I need to be. That's exactly what I need to be experiencing. So yeah, I'm really good. And how are you today, mate?
Yeah, well, I was just saying I just arrived in Austria at my parents' house last night, and it's interesting. Whenever you go back to your, the house that you lived as a child, of course, many memories. But you also I tend to sleep really well. I think maybe it's just these childhood patterns, and just kind of zonk out. So I had a very good sleep. So, and it's, it's very rural here. It's near southern Austria. It's very misty. There's a lake nearby. So very beautiful.
Lovely. And I can completely relate to that when I go back and visit my parents who have recently moved back to the village where I lived as a kid, even though we're not in the same house, that there's something, that familiarity. And also I think, even I'm a 45-year-old man, that sense of security of being close to the people that are really quite important and dear to me is very relaxing, even as a man. So I, like you, sleep very well in my parents' house. Is it the same house that you grew up in as well, was it, Chris?
Yeah, not quite, no. I didn't grow up in it because we grew up in Asia, but they bought this house 40 years ago. for a long time, it's been a reference point.
Yeah. Chris, give us an overview of what led you to write this book, The Resilience Culture, and to be co-founder of Awaris, mate.
Yeah, sure. So, so I think it's relevant. I grew up in Asia, so of course I was exposed to many, situations, cultures, and so on. I think that also comes with a basic adaptability. And I studied in London. I studied physics, and then I did an MBA in the States. So I kind of went into that tangent. I worked for the Boston Consulting Group for 7 years, which is a consulting company. And I think already in that time I began to, of course, get interested in things like mindfulness. So I was actually, I think I was a record holder at BCG. I still hold the, I think, unclaimed record of having the most leave of absences. You could do that. Because of course consulting companies were happy to have people that kind of functioned well, and they gave you freedom. So I would go off. I think so in my total 7 years, I had 1.5 years of leave of absence, primarily going on a retreat. So I went quite deeply into mindfulness practice, and then when I kind of left BCG, I actually ran a set of meditation centers, 75 meditation centers, for 7 years. And so, I think that was, something dear to me and something I, became, I guess, quite familiar with. And then, at some point, the next phase, was calling. And me and Liana, my co-founder, we founded Awaris. I guess bringing together you could say, human-centric insights of how do humans function, with, I guess, the challenges of the modern business world, and with these, practices of mindfulness and so on that I've been learning. So I think that was the kind of natural, maturation, intention. And that's kind of, already been growing. And I think we have now 20 staff around, and we have about 75 trainers around the world I just came back from China last week. So I think that's, something that I feel is important in today's age, where there's so much acceleration and I think so much hot air around topics like mindfulness, resilience, and so on. What's actually the reality, and what really works. So I think that's something that, as a physicist, and I still call myself a physicist, even, it kind of affected my life deeply. I really try to understand, causality. And that led us, also to this, looking deeper at this topic of resilience in a slightly different way than I think is, commonly done.
So what led you on the path or spiked your interest in terms of mindfulness, Chris?
I think mindfulness, to be honest, it was just logic. So I finished my degree quite early. I finished my physics degree at 19. And so I took a year off, kind of to just figure out what to do with time. And then during that time, I went on a retreat in Thailand, a 10-day, retreat, silent retreat practice. And it was just, it just made sense in terms of, I've used this mind my whole life. I've never actually looked at this mind. And actually, I have no idea how it functions. And actually, if I sit here and I work with the breath, I'm really, it's not so much about the breath. I'm really looking at the mirror of my own mind. How does the mind function? And, it's clear, it becomes clear when you examine that, you realize that all of reality, your perception of life comes through, your mind. I mean, in this situation, behind you, you have this wonderful, plant there. But if you aren't looking at it, you just don't perceive it, And I think that's something that many people completely underestimate, that, your perception, how you direct your attention is your gateway to reality, And it just became kind of obvious then, hold on, this, if you don't know anything about this, that's not very helpful. And actually, when you begin to learn about these things, you begin to, you begin to find that actually things like attention, things like emotional regulation, things like perception, all of these things are actually eminently trainable, and it's very important to train them.
Mm-hmm. So I'm getting the impression then you're quite open to learning or receiving the teachings or even your own insights or revelations around mindfulness and being present from an early age, even though you've done this retreat.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, of course, I was curious. I hadn't really, as I grew up, I hadn't really interacted with it. But, of course, at some point when you go off and do these things. And I think for me, it wasn't so much per se openness. It was more, based upon examination. It just made sense. I don't know if I was per se one of, I'm a spiritual seeker per se. I don't think so. It's just more like, oh, kind of, my goodness, yeah, when you examine it, it makes complete sense. And I continue to examine my experience, I guess.
Yeah. Again, another observation of mine is I'm making assumptions here, but in terms of business consulting, being very fast-paced and potentially quite aggressive and cutthroat, and then on the other spectrum to have this kind of presence, awareness, and ability to be mindful. Did that ever clash in your work?
I wouldn't say it clashed. I mean, it was certainly hard to unify it, to bring it together. Do you know what I mean? In the sense of, if you're practicing, practicing mindfulness is like a sport. It's a little bit, or like exercise. I mean, you've worked in high performance, sport and general work environments. You have to kind of keep at it, And so, of course, when you have a very intense and irregular lifestyle, it's difficult to stay at it. Okay, but fundamentally, I mean, if you honestly look at consulting and put away all the status stuff and so on, it's really about examining reality, helping companies examine the reality of the business they're in, and helping them understand better how to, function. And that's no difference. In some sense, I often say mindfulness is not about peacefulness or so. Mindfulness is actually the accurate examination of reality, understanding how the mind works and how you process, experiences. And, for that reason, I had no real at all dilemma, in the sense of philosophical dilemma. Do you know what I mean? Of course, there's a time dilemma, inability to just, stick to things at certain times and getting overwhelmed, but yeah, fundamentally, I didn't struggle with that part of it.
And what about culturally then? In terms of the culture of consulting?
I mean, I think I worked at consulting. I started working in consulting, almost 30 years ago, and I left over 20 years ago. So I think I can only say back then, especially I think the Boston Consulting Group, and was not a environment of competitiveness the whole time. There was a challenging environment. You had to kind of be ready to be challenged both by the client. I remember actually a story of a friend of mine who stayed for a long time in consulting. On his very first day at work, he was called up on Sunday by his project leader and said, tomorrow you're not coming to the office, you're going straight to the client. And by the way, I'm not there. And by the way, the first thing you have to do is lead a client meeting at 8 a.m. Cheerio, see you there. Good luck. And then he walks into this client, which is a machine, manufacturer. And the first thing the client says is, when I see people like you, I want to vomit. So that was just, so I mean, I think, it was, you have to be ready to be challenged in that sense, but it wasn't, I didn't find it an aggressive negative. It was challenging in the sense of, be accurate, work hard and so on. So yeah, I guess I didn't feel overtones of, aggressive negativity or so on. It might be different now, and I might have been lucky. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, so I didn't find a per se cultural problem.
What comes to me to ask is, I imagine yesterday I was doing a call, and we had a power cut. It's been raining a lot here in Spain the last couple of days, much needed. But I didn't ask this question, but I will today, and that is, if you could only talk about one thing today, or if we only had 2 minutes left, what would you tell me, just in case we got cut off, but I could still put this episode out? Especially around resilience. I mean, in terms of the hot air around this word.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding. So I think resilience is not about endurance. We are not rocks. We are human beings, flesh and blood, soft tissue. I think many people forget that. But it's really about learning to change and regulate your internal states in response to external stressors. So I think that's, first of all, it's important to clear away that misunderstanding. It's not about endurance. It's a very kind of masculine, old-fashioned view of the word. But it's about an ability to shift one's states. And we speak about 4 states: growing, regenerating, letting go, and being stressed, And I think once you understand that, then you can also quickly understand that it's actually a series of skills which allows us to, shift our states, and that is, I think, very learnable, eminently learnable. It's not about how you grew up. It's not about how tough you are. It's actually about noticing your state in a moment and learning to shift your state, And so I think that's important. And shifting your state is, again, I don't want to go into the voodoo of, this guy's going to talk about mindfulness again. It's not about that. It's really about it. Sometimes shifting your state is just getting up and getting some nuts. You know what I mean? I'm just going to get up, change my body posture, get some nuts, come back, sit down here. I've shifted my state. So I think it's, when you look at it like that, very directly, it's not very complex. And it's really about how you engage in your life, and it's very trainable.
What's some of the things that you teach in terms of raising our awareness of our own internal states before we get on to being able to change those internal states?
Yeah, so I think that this is very important, and it's very interesting. Our conversation, you said, you're oscillating between states of, warmth and, love, and of course, fear, and that's actually very fundamental to human physiology. Okay, I mean, if you think about where does human metabolism physiology comes from, it comes from the fact that, evolutionary wise, we were once blobs, swimming in a big ocean of whatever. And, so any organism has, something wants to come in, wants to reject that, that keep it out, and other things are attractive, keep them in, and that's basically, we have that in our, physiological structure. We have this, some things are attractive, good, and some things are negative, bad, dangerous. Okay. And that's what's called valence. Okay. So you have this valence of our experience, and then you have not only the valence of the experience, but the degree of arousal in a moment. Okay, so you might have a positive, valence of experience, like I like to play squash. I look forward to playing squash. But of course, I'm highly aroused when I play squash. It's very tiring. Okay, so it's something like it's a positive valence, but and high arousal. And then there's other things, like maybe making a presentation, to a corporate board, kind of, and they're gonna just shoot you down. Or to my friend, you could say going to work on his first day at PCG, high arousal and negative valence, because the first thing he hears is, people like you make me want to vomit. So I think that, we have, once you understand that as basic, part of our physiology, we have, these two dimensions, kind of the degree of arousal of a situation, the degree of valence of a situation. And, you talked about, and this is very nice, you talked about actually, hey, I'm oscillating a lot between these two states, and that's actually a positive sign. You see, that's actually a sign of that you're varying your state, okay? Because, essentially this modern kind of, mechanistic view of life is, there's stress and I have to endure in stress. I have to endure in this kind of high arousal, negative valence state. But actually we say, no, it's not healthy to try to endure there. Actually, it's pretty unhealthy. A lot of chronic, stress and illness and burnout and so on happens there. It's actually a key thing is to be able to move your state around these four. So you're talking about this movement, back and forth between, kind of valence left and right, positive and negative. And then there's the, this movement, which is, between high and low stress. And once you begin to understand that and look at your life and go, okay, when am I in, states of positive valence? What are the things that inspire me? Make sure I do that, And I think that that's what happens to people is that they don't pay attention to their state. They think that I'm home, I'm just going to take out my phone and relax. But actually, phone is stimulation. So basically, they're keeping themselves, let's say they're stressed, in a negative valence state. They come home and they do, they pick up their phone and they watch a couple of funny YouTube videos. Okay, that's moving to the positive. It's kind of entertaining for a while, but it's still high arousal, actually. And then after a while, the videos get darker and it's, doom scrolling. So they kind of move into a lower arousal negative state again, you see. So rather than having really relaxed, read a book or done something nice with, going out into nature, do you see, they end up just in a very small motion, which is quite close to, that. And that's, not healthy. And I think that for people to learn to both notice their internal state and to learn to regulate it is really not that hard. But it, it requires attention.
Yeah. And if I were to reflect, I understand completely what you're saying. And if I was to reflect on my own experiences in terms of work, that the need to look after ourselves then and have that time and space to downregulate or create more calm environments to move ourselves between those states. Firstly, it might have been talked about, but isn't, in my experience, never really taught. And secondly to that, and I guess I'm going to be really careful with my words here, but in today's culture, it's not even really or widely. It's not that it's not accepted, promoted. It's more, yeah. That's my own perception, and I know that's a generalization, but I'm not quite sure where I was going with that. Yeah, but I guess there's two things there then. So it's not really taught, and there you go, and it's not really encouraged until it's too late,
and maybe even it's not really believed. That's the starting point.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean about reality. I think that actually a lot of what goes on in business life is complete voodoo. It's kind of completely unrealistic. You do that too. I meet a lot of people. We're a high performance company, high performance leadership team. So I say, super. What are your relaxation routines? And they look at me like, what do you mean? No. We go.
Yeah.
I say it's completely unrealistic. No high performance sports person ever maintains high performance without conscious recovery, relaxation, because they know how the body and mind function, And so therefore, when I meet, these leaders who say, yeah, we're a high performance leadership team, I say bollocks. If you can't tell me.
What a brilliant word. You can tell you've been in the UK.
Exactly. If you haven't got clarity about your recovery and relaxation routines, then you are not a high performance team at all. There's no question, no discussions about that. It's interesting. I work a lot with a Formula One team for many years. They have a real focus on psychological safety and recovery. You see, because they understand that you cannot maintain high performance if you do not have that kind of focus. So I think that, so going back to your example, I think that, historically, let's say 15 years ago, there were natural rhythms that people had in life. They went to lunch in the cafeteria and they had social connection. Plus they had food, nourishment. Okay. Then at 5 o'clock, they went home. And they did not spend the next 3 hours on their email or on their, smartphone. You see, so I think that we had this natural variation, much more naturally, you could say, whatever, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now with our digital work and this kind of belief in, performance and always being on and so on, we have to become conscious of it and create these situations ourselves. Okay. And so I think, it's really, situations have changed. And with that, there is a belief in how humans can function that's completely unrealistic. It's rubbish, and it has to be said very clearly, it has to be named very clearly, and then you have to help people go, okay, yeah, you're right, my reality is constant digital stimulation. Even you and I are now currently in a digital environment, and actually if you look at how digital stimulation works, it works very directly on the nervous system. Okay, so one of the ways you can test that is, many people do that, is they wake up in the morning and they're lying in the bed, groggy, and the first thing they do is they grab their phone, and then they pick their phone up because they instinctively know that the light of their phone will actually stimulate them and wake them up. Okay? They can't name that, but actually that's what's happening. Do you see? And so, I think people need to understand that we are just subject to a lot more stimulation and a lot more negativity. So systematically, we're being pushed into this, field of high stimulation, high negativity, and we have to learn to move ourselves because it's not going to happen. It's like, in modern age, we're confronted with high calories and you could say high sugar content of our calories. You could make a correlation and say calories is like stimulation and the sugar content is like, negativity. And therefore you have to learn to move yourself out of a space of, just eating high calorie, high, sugar food. And that many of us have learned that, it's natural for us. And I think in the same way, I really encourage that regulating stress is not so difficult once you understand it. It's just natural, but you have to do it.
Yeah. I think what comes to me then is the courage to be able to create that both for ourselves and probably, first before we do that as a culture, be that as a family, as a business or bigger. Being a father to 2 young kids, the amount of constant challenge in terms of wanting screens, be that just have a look at my phone, or for the PlayStation that they were desperate to get for Christmas, or to the snacks. We're bombarded by these things, and it's so easy to understand why parents and even normal people, most people, average, in fact everybody, falls into that trap sometimes.
And a good way of, I think, working with that is interesting. I had that with my daughters too, and it wasn't that we tried to forbid it, but we just tried to again make them feel how it made them feel.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the key thing. And this is the same thing about, I think, diet. So I'm not so good. I mean, I'm not bad at my diet, but I'm not so good at my diet. But, my co-director, she feels what something does to her. And therefore, it's not about judging herself. I shouldn't eat this. I should eat this. But she just feels it. This is not good for me. Therefore, I won't eat it. Do you see what I mean? And I think this is the same thing for, working with digital stimulation. And in general, therefore, the connection to resilience. I think it's important. It's not about forbidding it for people or children, but it's about encouraging them to notice and feel what that does to them. And therefore, for them naturally to realize when they've had their fill. And my daughters really have that occasion, that they really say, my older daughter especially, she'll say, I just had enough. I'll turn on my phone for 3 days. Do you know what I mean? And she'll self-regulate that way because she's learned to pay attention to what she feels and not, we're a mindfulness family.
Yeah.
Put away your phone, And I think that's what I think is so important is how do you help companies? How do you help individuals, learn this regulation and resilience? Of course, at some level, you have to show them data. It's very important because data is important for people to cognitively understand some. But above all, you have to teach them to feel. You see, to notice their states and actually to notice what being in a regenerative state feels like, or being in a growth state feels like. And therefore, they get themselves attracted to that. And that's, I think, quite doable.
Yeah. That's really interesting you said that. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was sat on the sofa with my kids watching a film on a rainy Saturday afternoon. And I had the observation, which I think I communicated them, the lethargic state we were all in after an hour and a half film, and the temptation to keep going with something else. The next day on the Sunday, we went out for a walk, and whilst there's quite a riot to get out of the front door, some of the comments, the interactions that we had, the three of us, whilst my wife, she's working night shifts as a nurse, while she's either working or sleeping, it was a really interesting observation for me. What we want in terms of, in this case, screens and sweets, we want it immediately, but it makes us feel bad or a certain different state, always not always positive afterwards. Yet sometimes going out in nature, going for a walk, or is there a lot of resistance at the beginning, but look how we felt during and after that experience. So it's
that's good. I remember with my daughter as well, when things were really yucky. I guess one of the things I maintain is a sense of humor. And then I said, okay, let's go out and do a puddle jumping competition. So we both put on boots, some galoshes, and we would see who could. And the puddle jumping idea was to actually see who could make the biggest splash, jumping into a puddle. And I think that's the thing. You have to acknowledge that children have a natural need for input, for humor, for warmth, for experience. And if you're not helping them get real life experience, they're going to substitute that by virtual experience. But real life experience is sensory, so much richer. That's one of the things. This is a very important point to understand, that a lot of people who are very wealthy suffer from a complete feeling of poverty. Okay? Because they are not open to their sensory experience. And the feeling of richness comes from sensory experience, you see. And I think that's one of the things that happens in today's world. People working virtually, they don't have a feeling of richness in their day of interaction, nor they have a feeling of efficacy. Okay? That something works, because it's never really clear what works. So it's interesting. I work a lot with people in production environments, in automotive production. On the one hand, you could say it's a very stressful environment, but they have a feeling of efficacy. They walk through, they see people, they see that this is fixed. And I think that, one of the reasons why people struggle in virtual work is they have neither a feeling of sensory richness, nor do they have a feeling of efficacy. And then they substitute that with other forms of, stimulation, which kind of spirals them off into, again, worse states of being.
Yeah. So what's some of the things, the key points that you look for when you walk into a company or a business in terms of helping them improve their resilience?
Yes, I think, again, I used to say physics, BCT, so I am very analytical. And so typically what we encourage them to do is to do resilience screenings with their staff, okay? So, and each person will get a completely anonymous individual report showing what resilience skills they have. This is one of the key things, is we kind of show people what skills they have. Because that's, again, very important to strengthen people, for them to understand what they can already rely upon, okay? But then, of course, from that analysis at the individual level, we see at the group level, we really see the data about what the different stressors are people are struggling with, which skills people have, and which skills are overall lacking, which are lacking in the population, and which skills are lacking fundamentally in the kind of, actually cultural fabric of the business, okay? And I like, it's often, it's interesting, and I hope not to offend anybody, but I like working with the people in terms of well-being who are connected to the safety. So the health and safety people are. Because essentially they've learned that safety is an issue of process. okay, and rituals, okay. You don't change. You can't kind of do like a 1 hour workshop in a plant and say you have a safety issue, and everyone goes, oh yeah, we have a safety issue. That was a nice workshop. Bye bye. You know what I mean? It's like anybody involved in safety goes like, how completely ludicrous. Like come on, wake up. But that's how well-being is dealt with. We have a 1 hour workshop. Oh, great. And it's like, come on, let's get realistic. It's not going to change anything. Okay. So, then the next thing is to really kind of work with them to understand, okay, for example, okay, you have an issue with people doing emails out of hours. Okay. Point one, here's the data which shows how much stress that contributes. Okay. Because there's a lot of evidence that basically the expectation of being reachable after hours contributes a lot to people's feeling of poor work-life balance. Okay, even if they aren't working too much, but this feeling does. Okay, so then what we'll do is we'll actually get the companies to analyze 2 months of emails, okay, after 8 o'clock, and say, please analyze them. Please find us actual situations which had to be dealt with out of hours. And usually they come back and go, actually, we found no situation which couldn't be dealt with within 2 to 4 hours of the next working day. Super. Okay. Then make agreements about that people should not be checking emails. And of course, there are people who have kids and they want to go home early and then check the emails, and fine. Let them look at their emails, but it's clear that there's no expectation of checking emails. And then to actually measure that, because you see, you can't just say, oh yeah, you're right. Checking emails outside of hours is not good. Everyone does it because, I don't know, people just expect it. No one ever discussed it. It's kind of very unclear situation, you see. So like in the health situation, you might have in the safety situation in the plant, you might have risks, okay? Once you've identified the causes of those risks, you need to kind of begin to identify the factors that will eliminate those risks and actually measure that. And so, if you do that, if you find in the stressor analysis that the company has an issue with this perception of work-life balance, that tends to be one of the biggest, sources of stress. And then you kind of say, okay, look, what are the reasons? Is it, working hours? And if it's not working hours, but it's actually just reachability, and then you kind of analyze the reachability and say, actually, we didn't find any emails. And then you kind of say, okay, look, let's now try to reduce the email checking out of hours by 60% in the next 3 months. You can track that. It's very easy to track that on servers. And let's look at the causes, you see? And this is what is so important, how I find it's important to work with people, is you have to be, on the one hand, analytical, but you have to make agreements which are actually anchored into the fabric of the organization. You can't expect, Aaron to show up at a nice 1 hour workshop and walk away going, yeah, I'm stressed because, I'm checking my emails too much. And then for 5 days, Aaron doesn't check his emails, But then on, day 7, so-and-so says, why didn't you answer this email in the evening, Then Aaron can say, actually, look, we discussed it. We all know it's pointless.
Yeah.
Because the others haven't reflected. They think it's meaningful, and it isn't. So anyway, so I think this is the key thing: is really this understanding of we need to be analytical about these things. We need to kind of have real data, and then we need to agree upon organizational-wide practices that we're going to stick to and measure, because it's not going to change otherwise. Okay, so this is, I think, we started off talking a lot about, kind of the human dimension, but I'm a little bit hard and also, I guess, quite tough on this whole process dimension. I think I've been a physicist and a consultant for too long, It's not going to change if you're not going to actually measure things. So one company, global company, said, yep, we understand this. Focus times are important. Meeting-free times are important. We're going to announce now, 60,000 person company, we're going to announce now, Monday morning should be meeting-free. And you kind of go, oh, come on. I mean, how stupid. Do you know what I mean? Nobody is good at making Monday mornings meeting free. Do you know what I mean? And then who's going to measure this? How are you going to control this? You see what I mean? So these are just things where you think, come on, like, wake up. You guys are so smart about measuring certain, brand identity, and you kind of globally can analyze this. And then you say something like this from the CEO, which just has no intelligence in it whatsoever.
I think that leads me on to my next question, though, or point that I'm guessing then it needs to be a certain level of buy-in from the leadership, firstly to bring you in, and then to listen to the insights that come. And I would maybe incline to think that in this case there wasn't 100% belief that was really necessary, or it's just a quick tick box exercise, and there's a deeper level there to maybe the example leadership set for everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you say, there's a depth of, in the sense of, okay, let's be accountable for this. Do you see what I mean? If you can announce Monday mornings I'm meeting free time, what are you accountable for? Are you accountable for 60% or 30% or 10% of people actually doing that? And so I think that this is the thing, is there's no, in that sense, accountability. And in some sense, it's understandable. Well-being, workplace resilience is very complex because you're dealing with issues that are A, human, B, partly outside of your workforce control. Happens in somebody's private life, actually, what kind of stresses them in part. C, it's interacting also with complex organizational systems. Okay, so it is very complex. Okay, and I think more complex than most issues companies are used to analytically dealing with. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and begin to learn. Any kind of complexity you have to approach with a conscious mind to begin to understand the causality in that complexity and the interconnections. Okay, and once you do that, then you can find. And so, for example, there's a lot of evidence that Friday afternoons is very beneficial for people. It is has a very strong productivity impact on people. Meeting free, so Friday afternoons has a strong productivity impact. And it has a strong well-being impact because people leave the office and they got their stuff done. They didn't have additional stuff piling onto them on Friday. So, you can do that and then say, let's measure it. Let's say the target now should be for year one that we have, 40% of people worldwide have Friday afternoons free for getting stuff done. But it's not free for not doing anything. So, of course, you have to track, are they just going to take time off too? I mean, there's complex things, Recently, I had a discussion with somebody who said, yeah, they've tried one day meeting free. They're, coding. It's a software company. And they found that the actual amount of code written on that meeting free day was a lot less. And therefore, they felt it wasn't working because basically they felt people were just goofing off. But I said, honestly, it's not clear to me. Did you analyze what their reported work hours were on that day? They might indeed have gone to the dentist that day because it's convenient and therefore work 2 hours less. And so, of course, if they're only working 6 hours, they'll be coding a little bit. So I was just kind of struck by this it's a global software company, very analytical, and they came to such a conclusion with so little data. You know what I mean? Mm. So anyway, I think that you have to have some kind of buy-in in the sense of, okay, we're going to figure out how to make this work, in the sense of looking at the problems that come up too, and seeing, okay, what are the obstacles? Why isn't this working? But like anything, I mean, it's like, I always use the example, if you have a manufacturing leader, okay, and he has a quality problem, okay, let's say the kind of whatever the, failure parts rate is gone up from, should be at, 0.03 and it's gone up to 1.1, okay, and you say, fix it. And 3 weeks later, you see him, and how's it going? Oh yeah, we had a workshop on it for an hour. We don't know. It could get better. Do you know what I mean? It's like what? But then you do the same thing on the well-being. You say, yeah, we had a workshop on it for an hour. So will it get better? No idea. So anyway, so this is really, I think that's why I think you have to be very realistic about understanding how humans function and go, okay, this isn't going well for people. So let's begin to analyze what we can do, and how can we help individuals? And this is, again, we see this in our data. We see that there's a certain stressor load. So you can measure stressors, there's a high workload and, I have to work after hours and, maybe my daughter is sick and, I don't know what, I have financial uncertainty. There's a whole scale you can use to measure people's stressors. And we see that basically when people are facing over usually more than 4 stressors at a serious level, then actually their ability to be resilient massively drops off. Okay? So essentially, statistically, you see that up to 3 or 4 stressors, we call that the Goldilocks zone, it's much better to help Aaron develop his own resilience skills, working on his sleep, working on his emotional regulation, working perhaps on his connection to people. Do you see what I mean? Compassion, you said earlier, and that will help him more. So we see that in a low stressor level, individual resilience interventions are more impactful. Okay, but once you get Aaron into a situation where he's basically facing, he's got bad boss, he's got poor work-life balance because of heavy workload, plus he has worries about his financial issues. Do you see? Then actually it's very hard for the individual to do something about it. Okay, it's too much, and you need to have help from outside. And I think it's very helpful again for companies to understand that. What's the right trade-off? When is it important to help individuals with individual skill building? When do we need to do something from the company kind of side? And I think that, that's all of this clarity is missing for many, many companies and leadership teams. They haven't really paid attention to it. It's just like a yucky, difficult topic they don't really know how to deal with, and it's just okay, whatever.
Yeah. So what's some of the key skills that you teach when you go into a company in terms of improving resilience?
Yeah, so I think, again, we did a lot of analysis and also looked at the literature. We found that there are 12 skills. And 12 skills, I mean that things humans can do that actually move them around their internal landscape. Okay, so as an example, let's say, I'm here kind of up in the high stress, high negative zone, okay? And then I leave the office and I do some sports, okay? My stress will actually increase. Sport is stress, okay? It'll even go there. But then afterwards, I come down into a calm, regenerate zone. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I've done is I move myself around. Or let's say it's Sunday morning and I'm kind of like a bit negative and, low arousal. Even if I do sports again, it raises my stress level first, but then it kind of puts me here in this positive regeneration zone. Okay, so sports is an example. Exercise and movement is an example of how we move around. Another one is like, let's say I have a good meal. Okay, so I'm at my desk. It's it's Tuesday at 2:00. I just had a difficult meeting, and I go to the cafeteria and I sit together with Aaron and we have a nice conversation and we have a nice meal. Then I end up here and I come back and I'm much more regenerated. Okay. But let's say, and this is very typical in the UK, let's say I just sit in front of my laptop, eating my sandwich while doing my work. I don't move anywhere. You see what I mean? Another example is, emotional regulation. Okay, so many people are quite good at emotional regulation or attention regulation. Okay, so you can really see that actually this is very interesting about this. You can really see, and we can measure that. We do measurements with people with heart rate variability. We've done, I think, upwards of a few thousand measurements of people all day, 4 to 5 days, and you can kind of really see where they are and what moves them around this landscape. Okay, so essentially there's these 12 skills. Another one, for example, by the way, is compassion. When people express compassion to others, that changes their own internal state. Another one is connection to purpose. You really see when people are connected to purpose, they might be kind of low and gloomy. They become inspired. They move up to this kind of corner. So, you really see that there are 12 things that individuals can do, and you can kind of assess whether individuals are doing that, whether they're actually engaging in consciousness. That's what we do. We measure engagement in these skills, okay? And then you can do the same thing at the organizational level. Do you see it? You can do the same thing at the organizational level, especially around things like attention regulation, purpose, social connection, all of these kind of, human to human skills. So that's what we measure. We don't measure traits so much or so on, but we measure directly observable skills. And actually, we've done this with 120 teams too. And it's very interesting. We see exactly which skills lead to what outcomes in terms of innovation or psychological safety or performance. Okay, so it's very interesting to see that, for example, teams that have good attention regulation, so teams that have cameras on when they have meetings, that don't interrupt each other, that have focus times in their calendar which are shared, and which have, you could say, good multitasking agreements. Okay, that they typically are high-performing teams. 94% of those teams are high-performing teams, whereas teams that do not have attentional agreements, actually only 50% of them are high-performing teams. Okay, so we kind of have seen now with these kind of core human. So we start off with this kind of core human level, identifying these 12 skills, and then we kind of said, look, these 12 skills are actually, they manifest at the team level too. How do teams connect? So what's the social connection? Do teams take time for social connection? So we ask, again, for each of the skills, we ask teams 4 questions, 4 habits, whether they're visible. And we can then predict when teams do have them or not, actually what the outcome is on their performance. And that's a very crucial piece because, companies are all about performance. Okay? In the end, that's what it's about. That's their raison d'être. And so, you have to make this connection to how these engagement in these things actually pays into both well-being outcomes and performance outcomes. And that's, I think, what we can do very nicely, both with the team data that we have, as well as with the organizational data that we have, and say, hey, guys, and it's very interesting. So, we might do so. I'm just today. I'm meeting. I've got data for a UK company we're just working with. It's an automotive supplier, and we did an assessment for 100 people of their resilience skills. And interesting enough, the biggest stressor that came out was lack of growth opportunities. It surprised me. It wasn't what people were expecting. Okay. And interesting enough as well, when you look at the people who are resilient in that population, the ones that have the highest resilience are the ones that have a good connection to purpose and that have good emotional regulation. Interesting. So it's very interesting. In different populations, you see different stuff coming out. Okay, so if you have a kind of a population of carers, people in, let's say in healthcare, you often see that emotional regulation and compassion are some of the biggest predictors of their resilience skills. When you have leaders, often their attention regulation and things like exercise are their biggest predictors of resilience. Okay, so typically you see people with a high workload that has those people who have very high workloads. Attention regulation becomes one of the biggest predictors of resilience and well-being outcomes. Okay, so so this is the thing that we kind of do with them, is we just begin to kind of get this data and show them, hey, you in particular, for the situation you're facing. So automotive industry as an example, at currently low growth prospects, a lot of uncertainty. Okay, interesting enough, this lack of growth prospect is actually worrying people the most. And therefore, this connection to purpose, why are you here, is kind of very important. And we see this also, we work a lot in political environments, we work as well in the UK with the UK Parliament. And there you see as well in political environments as well, connection to purpose is very crucial for people's resilience.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of comes out differently, for each companies, what skills they need to work on and how to work on them.
Yeah, and I guess what leaps out at me the last couple of days that I've been reflecting on my own things is this purpose, again, to get really clear on my own purpose. And so I can understand, or if we're in a company working, and in this case there's no possibility for growth, how can I develop? How can I grow? What, I guess we're asking ourselves the questions, what's the point? It's pointless. And things start to dive from there.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's a very interesting. Connection to purpose is typically, so we work a lot for the European Union. And so we do a lot of assessments in that environment. And we see that in governmental environments, connection to purpose is one of the most important predictors of resilience. Okay. And so that's something you have to really nourish. Okay. Yeah. And that's, and nourishing it is not just, here's a new opportunity for you. Nourishing is actually, let's remember why we're all here. Why do we care? So often when I work with quite some senior people at the commission. Often I'll start by saying, oh, by the way, we'll have a training session, and I'll open the training session. I say, oh, by the way, I'm a European citizen, and I'd like to start by thanking you. And they all look at me like, this guy's a little weird. Where did he come from? Do you know what I mean? And I say, no, I'm sorry. I know this is like, you don't like to hear this, or maybe even embarrassing for you, but I really want to take this moment and say, hey, these are the things that you've done. And I want to thank you very much for that. Okay. I think it's very important, these things. And I do the same thing working in political environments in the UK to say, actually, look, pay attention to this. This is really important. These are the things you've done. And this is very important about connection to purposes. People have to also connect to actually all the things that they're working on, which are going well, which are safe society, which are, do you know what I mean? And so, I think it's very important to, when people struggle with, as you say, growth opportunities or this, challenge of finding their purpose, it's also important to connect them to actually, why did you choose to be here? And what is it? And is it actually not that some of this is still actually very rewarding if you think about it? And I think that that's, very helpful to help people with. And as you say, it's interesting, again, in the data, you see that the more uncertain things get, the more connection to purpose becomes important. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, because connection to purpose is, not navigating by the currents, but navigating by the stars, you see? And that's the thing. When you're out in, open water, and you don't know where you're going, you need to have a kind of orientation. So I think that, these are things that are very interesting to see coming out of the data. And for different situations, what are the skills that people need to navigate, and that they're different. And I think that again there's no understanding of that in the well-being space. There's different things needed for different types of stressors, different type of stress situation. And again, I think that gets a lot of buy-in, you see, because when companies hear that, they go, yeah, you're right. That's actually what we're struggling with. Oh, we never thought about it this way. Oh, okay, you're right. We need to have conversations about purpose. It's a difficult time now. We need to reconnect to our purpose. Okay. So I think that, this is, it all comes from a basic understanding of physiology, interestingly enough. If you look at connection to purpose, it's actually interesting that connection to purpose, from the evolutionary point of view, is very important for survival. You see, because if you and I have a story to tell each other about our shared purpose, we're much more likely to work together. Okay. Therefore, when people connect to a higher purpose, you see a lot of changes in their physiology. You see, there's actually a release of dopamine, and there's a kind of a sense of relaxation of current worries. Okay, so and this is what I mean. So we looked at the physiology of this. We saw, interesting. There's a lot of research showing that connection to purpose does lead to downregulation of stress and increase in resilience. So it's one of the 12 skills. Look, organizations need it too. And actually, when organizations are going through very stressful times with a lot of uncertainty, connection to purpose is a very important thing to help them with systematically. And I think that this overall architecture of our approach really helps people kind of, the whole thing makes sense, and how it, pays attention, pays into performance. And therefore, please, please, please take well-being and resilience seriously. So you don't just say, okay, we'll do 1 hour workshop on it, but actually you need to invest in purpose. And purpose doesn't have to be that you as a company have to kind of come up with a new purpose. It could also be that you give teams time to talk about their purpose and to reflect upon it, and to each person to remember, why did I show up here? Oh yeah, you're right. And we did this and we did this, and that really worked well, and I was really happy. And yeah, you're right. We never talk about these things, you see, because people never talk about these things. They go, the next problem. I need this urgent issue to solve, And that, is continually draining people, rather than saying, hey guys, let's spend some time talking about all the things that have gone well.
Yeah. Yeah, so much to say that I could keep going all day, but we'll go for longer. But yeah, going back to why you start by thanking people, I might have missed that. But what was your motive behind that, Chris? Why do you sit down and thank people in terms of the politicians or the?
Because I think first of all, I do remain. I think, again, there's a bias in today's world because news is free. Okay, so therefore, negative news gets more clicks than positive news. One plane crashed, not 23,000 planes landed safely. Do you know what I mean? And therefore, actually, there's a lot of analysis about that the news and informational landscape is becoming much more negative. Okay, and this is especially in companies that if you have 150 emails per day, you don't open all the emails. You only open the ones that are serious and negative. Okay? And there's always something to talk about. Okay, it's very simple. If you're driving 200 kilometers per hour on the highway, which you can do in Germany, okay, then you have to be highly alert. So companies that are driving at full speed basically have to be highly alert for the negative. Okay, so there's good reasons why our informational landscape has become much more negative, but that means that we don't actually notice fundamentally all the things that are going well. All the beauty, all the warmth, all the safety. And so this is particularly important in political environments. Political environments have become far more negative. Okay? And because also people don't take time to appreciate all the things that are actually going well in our societies. Okay, so if you look at the website Factfulness, you'll see the data gathered on all the things that are going well to see in life. Literacy is increasing and child deaths are declining. Do you know what I mean? And like 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years, 15 years. It's just phenomenal, actually, the positive developments in the world. Same thing I was just in China last week. Okay, and China isn't overwhelming to the census, but actually China has said we want to plant the equivalent area of Belgium each year with new trees. Belgium. It's like, what? And you see this. You look out the window on the train. I was in the train from Shanghai to Beijing. It was 4 hours, 1,100 kilometers. Poof, and everywhere tree planting. Do you see what I mean? So the news landscape about China is generally very negative, but actually, when you see what's going on, there's a lot of positive too. It's not to say that the negative doesn't exist. Yeah, the negative still exists. I'm not trying to deny the negative, but so. Informationally, there's a strong negative bias in our perception nowadays. Okay, and it's very important to shift one's perception to actually pay attention to the positive, which is reality. You see, it's not that the positive is rose-colored glass. So therefore, in the political environment, I pay particular attention to that because, actually, people who are politicians often are public servants. They came to serve the public. You see, and if they don't feel that they're doing good serving the public, they lose their inspiration. They become very cynical. So that's what happens in political environments: is people become quite cynical, more so than in a bank, or in an automotive company. Do you know what I mean? And so, reconnecting to that, and also pointing out people that their perception is biased towards negative, is very important. And that's why I do it, even if it's embarrassing at first.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm understanding is you're recognizing or giving them that opportunity to reconnect to why they're there doing their thing. And from what I'm hearing as well is, again, where do we put our focus? Be it all right on the negative or all left on the positive, or acknowledging both, because both are there. It is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both are there. And actually, if you say to your average engineer, you should pay attention to the positive. What do you mean? There's this risk, and there's this risk, and there's this risk. Yeah, there are these risks. But actually, you've solved 600 other risks already. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, you have 3 problems and pay attention to them. But don't forget, like I sit in cars nowadays. Isn't it amazing how good cars are? It's like 6,000 pieces brought together to function as a smooth whole. For 15 years, these things work. Do you know what I mean? Keep you safe, warm. So, there's big danger, I think, if we don't appreciate all the things that are going well. And that's a fundamental skill. And, it's not about putting on rose-colored glasses, but it's actually about seeing the reality of how amazing cars are.
Yeah,
how whole amazing picture. Trains are. The whole picture. How amazing our food supply is. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, that's I kind of find so important, and that's one of the skills that people have. People who are resilient have the skill of actually perceiving the positive.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, what do you think might be one of the most overlooked skills in the 12 skills that you teach, or easily forgotten about or dismissed?
Yeah, I think the 2 that come up the strongest are interoception. We cite that, or self-awareness, but we use the word interoception for that because it's really the skill of noticing your physiological state. So it's not just your mental self-awareness, but actually your physiological self-awareness. Okay, and and I think that's a personal story for me. I studied physics. I did not know I had a body. Do you know what I mean? I was like a head on a stick. I was kind of in there in quantum mechanics and so on. And my co-director, Liane, she is Mrs. Embodied. Okay, so she had anorexia when she was young. And she talks about that openly, that she was actually in a clinic for 14 months of anorexia. Really, it was a touch and go situation whether she was going to live or not. Okay. But in some sense, that taught her fundamentally to have extremely high resolution awareness of her body. Okay. And so this ability to notice, and for example, Liane, she can feel each organ in her body. Okay. She can notice the temperature shifts in different parts of her body. She can notice exactly what food is doing to different parts of her body. And she can walk into a room where 6 people are who are not talking, and she can say exactly what happened in the room before, because she feels what people's status, do you see? So that's a skill. It's called interoceptive awareness. That's just one that a lot of people are like, what is that? Don't even know that. But it can be cultivated. It's just like learning Chinese. At first you don't hear the syllables. You have to train your ears. But once you train your ears, you begin to hear Chinese, see? And that's the same thing. You have to learn to train your bodily awareness. So that's one. And then the other one, which is interesting, which is conscious breathing. Okay. So you can regulate a lot by breath. You can down-regulate your nervous system very quickly through breathing, and you can actually up-regulate yourself too. You can actually raise, and I don't know if you know the extremes are these people who sit in Tibet in the snow, in the frozen snow, and they have to they get frozen blankets put on their shoulders, and they have to dry the blanket in the winter snow because of their ability to raise their body temperature through breathing. So these are extremes of what people can do. And so this is, I think, the 2 that come out in our data as being the ones that people kind of like, I didn't know that.
Yeah, even if you don't have to defrost a blanket in the snow.
You don't have to dry a blanket in the snow. We only do that to some of our participants.
Chris, I'm gonna start to wrap it up soon, but I was just wondering if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention or leave as a parting discussion point.
I think that shifting away from a kind of a fixed view of resilience is very important, and then realizing once you begin to see it as a dynamic view and this ability to shift states a lot opens up. And I think when you do that and think about this way, actually that begins to free the mind of a, kind of a very sometimes stuck view of this topic. And I think then, beginning to then operationalize that with skills is really crucial, to think that actually, we all have a skill profile. We all have certain skills. And if actually we can strengthen those. So I think that this journey of, kind of, I guess, freeing our mental view of resilience and then taking a skill-based view and then building our skills is, I think, the essence of what I find is important for people. And I think that it is a lifelong journey. If I look at myself, was I resilient, at 20, I had a natural, young resilience, which means I can, stay up all night, go to sleep, and get up and I'm well again because my body, my body resilience was still at a highly functioning state. But I think that if I look at what I've learned in my life, I've probably learned about, of the 12 resilience skills we talk about, I'm probably pretty good at 9 of them. Do you know what I mean? Which means I can handle most things, So I think that, and I had a burnout once. I had a burnout about 15 years ago, so I kind of was, and burnout is a form of depression, so I was you could say, in a low resilience state. So I think that if I look at my life, once you take this view of variability and you take the skill building view, then actually it becomes a lifelong journey, and it's a very rewarding journey, one's ability to, I guess, regulate your internal states and begin to see things differently. So I think that's maybe the point that I haven't spoken so much about, this lifelong journey quality of it.
Love it. Chris, listen, thank you so much for spending time talking to me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. There's a lot that I've learned there. But where can people find you if they're interested in reaching out to you, mate?
Well, I mean, I think, the book is one way, of course. Read the book, The Resilient Culture. It's available on Amazon and, Waterstones and so on. And then the other way is just reach out to us, over the website, www.awaris.com. And, easy to find us and happy to speak to anybody. I really also to you, I very much appreciated the kind of openness and curiosity and softness in this conversation, So I really, also in our pre-conversations, I really appreciate that. And I think that that's necessary. I think a lot of people are struggling with these topics, and I think it's just really good to just be open and soft and, kind of be curious. I think that when you kind of go back to that, find and learn new things. So thanks for creating that atmosphere.
That's my pleasure. Likewise, Chris. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Take care.